I'm Brooke, 32, female. I live in a small coastal town, in a little cottage that smells perpetually of salt and old books. I'm a marine biologist, which means my days are spent either out on the water studying coral reef ecosystems or in my lab analyzing data. It's my dream job, even if it doesn't come with a corner office or a seven-figure salary. This quiet, fulfilling life was always the opposite of what my family valued, and I never realized how deep their disapproval ran until my father decided to announce it to everyone we knew. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The annual Thorne family reunion was less a gathering of loved ones and more a corporate shareholders meeting, with my father, Robert, as the self-appointed CEO. Every summer, dozens of relatives descended upon my parents' sprawling suburban home, a place I'd fled as soon as I turned 18. The house itself felt like a monument to my father's career in sales. Perfectly manicured, impressively large, but completely lacking in warmth or personality. It was a stage, and we, his children, were the performers. My older brother, Michael, was always the star of the show. At 35, he was a corporate lawyer with a jawline as sharp as his ambition. He'd arrive in a German luxury car, his perfectly tailored suit replaced by equally expensive casual wear, his wife a silent, smiling accessory on his arm. He would regale everyone with tales of mergers and acquisitions, of boardroom battles won and massive bonuses secured. My father would beam, clapping him on the back and calling him my son, the shark. It was his highest compliment. Then came my younger sister, Jessica. At 28, Jess was a successful real estate agent who had mastered the art of social media. Her life was a curated feed of sold properties, lavish vacations, and designer outfits. She measured success in commission checks and online followers. She knew how to play the game, always laughing at Dad's jokes and praising his business acumen. She was the perfect supporting actress in the Michael and Robert show. And then there was me. I was the odd one out, the strange creature from the deep. I usually arrived in my beat-up Jeep, smelling faintly of sunscreen and seawater, wearing comfortable clothes that were practical for my line of work. I didn't have stock options or sales figures to discuss. I had stories about witnessing coral spawning events under a full moon, or the intelligence of octopuses, or the delicate balance of the marine ecosystems I was fighting to protect. To my family, this was akin to speaking a foreign language. My father would listen with a tight, forced smile before changing the subject back to something he understood. Money, that's nice, Brooke, he'd say, his tone dripping with condescension. But does it pay the bills? He conveniently ignored the fact that my PhD and research grants meant I was perfectly self-sufficient. In his eyes, if a salary wasn't big enough to be bragged about, it didn't count. The only person who seemed genuinely interested was my Uncle David, my father's younger brother. David was a carpenter, a man who worked with his hands and found beauty in creating things. He was quiet, thoughtful, and had always been my ally. While my father and siblings gathered on the deck to talk business, Uncle David would find me by the garden, asking about my latest research. "Don't let them get to you, kiddo," he'd say, his voice a low rumble. "What you do matters, it's real. This," he'd gesture towards the house, "is just noise." I tried to hold on to his words, but the noise was often deafening. This year, however, the noise would escalate into a full-blown siren, one I could no longer ignore. It was a performance I had attended my whole life, but I had no idea this would be the year the lead actor finally went off script and revealed the ugly truth for all to see. The climax of every reunion was my father's traditional toast. After the barbecue had been devoured and the sun began to set, he would stand on the deck, tap a glass with a fork, and command the attention of the entire extended family. It was his moment to deliver the annual State of the Family address, which was really just an opportunity for him to boast about his legacy, primarily through the achievements of his children. I usually tried to blend into the background during this part, nursing a drink near the edge of the crowd. But this year he made sure I couldn't hide. "Gather round, everyone, gather round." He boomed, his voice carrying across the lawn. He had that self-satisfied look on his face, the one he got right before he was about to praise Michael. He started, as always with my brother. "I want to toast my son, Michael." He began, raising his glass, just made partner at his firm, 35 years old and already a partner. He's a true shark, a winner. We are all so incredibly proud of what he's accomplished. A round of applause erupted. Michael gave a modest, practiced nod, soaking in the adoration. Next was Jessica, and to my beautiful Jessie, Dad continued. Top seller in her agency for the second year in a row. She's got the golden touch, that one. Smart, successful, and making a name for herself. Your mother and I couldn't be prouder. More applause. Jess blew a kiss towards him, her smile wide and bright for the audience. I braced myself. Usually, my part of the speech was a brief, almost dismissive mention, something like, and Brooke is, still enjoying the ocean. It was a backhanded comment, but it was fleeting. This year was different. He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes locked onto mine. A smirk played on his lips, and of course there's Brooke, he said, his voice taking on a stage, whisper quality as if sharing a joke. My brilliant PhD holding daughter. The words sounded like sarcasm coming from him. She's out there, saving the fish. A few people chuckled awkwardly. I felt my face flush with heat. I could see Uncle David stiffen beside me. My father wasn't done. He took a sip from his glass, savoring the moment. You know, he said, his voice now loud and clear again, I stand here, and I am so proud of all my children. He gestured to Michael and Jessica, who were standing beside him like trophies. Then his gaze swung back to me, his smile turning into a cruel sneer, except, of course, the loser. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A wave of shocked silence washed over the crowd. Did he just say that, out loud, in front of everyone? My mind went blank. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes, aunts, uncles, cousins, all turning to stare at me, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Michael and Jessica didn't flinch. They just stood there, their expressions unreadable, as if they were watching a mildly interesting television show. Their silence was its own form of betrayal. They were complicit, happy to let me be the family scapegoat, as long as they remained the golden children. My father, seeing the stunned faces, seemed to realize he might have gone too far, but his attempt to backtrack only made it worse. Oh, come on, it's a joke. Brooke knows I'm just kidding. He said with a forced laugh. She chose a different path, a non-profit path, a hobby. But it wasn't a joke. It was the truth of how he saw me, finally spoken aloud. All the years of passive-aggressive comments, the dismissive questions, the unconcealed disappointment, it all coalesced into that one brutal word, loser. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stood there, a strange sense of calm washing over me. I smiled. It wasn't a real smile, but a tight, brittle thing that didn't reach my eyes. I raised my own glass slightly, as if toasting him back to family. I said, my voice barely a whisper, but he heard it. He looked momentarily confused, perhaps expecting tears or an argument, but I gave him nothing. I simply turned, set my glass down on a table, and walked through the crowd, ignoring the sympathetic glances and whispered comments. As I walked away, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was there, sharp and deep, but beneath it, a new feeling was taking root. Cold, hard resolve. He had drawn the battle lines, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to fight back. I drove home that night in a daze, the word loser echoing in my ears. But by the time I reached my little cottage by the sea, the shock had subsided, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. For years, I had accepted my role as the family disappointment. I had told myself their opinions didn't matter, that my work and my life had intrinsic value that they were simply incapable of seeing. But being publicly humiliated was a different kind of wound. It wasn't just a dismissal of my career, it was a dismissal of my entire being. My father's wealth was his identity. He had built his career, and by extension, his family's reputation, on the image of success. My siblings bought into it completely, their lives a testament to his values. But what was his success actually built on? He was a retired sales executive, and from what I remembered, he was good at it. But his level of wealth, the sprawling house, the seed money he'd given both Michael and Jessica to start their careers, it always seemed a little excessive for a man in his position. We were comfortable, yes, but he acted like royalty. A few days later, still stewing, I was cleaning out a closet when I stumbled upon a box of old family albums my mom had given me years ago, hoping I'd digitize them. I sat on the floor and began flipping through the pages, a painful journey through a past that now felt like a lie. There were photos of Michael's first baseball game, Jessica's dance recitals, and holidays where everyone was smiling for the camera. Then I found it. It was a photograph from the late 1980s. In it, a much younger version of my father stood with his arm around another man. Both were beaming, holding up a plaque. I didn't recognize the other man, but it was the plaque that caught my eye. It was an award for innovation in marine technology. I squinted, reading the smaller text engraved below. It named them as founders of a company I'd never heard of, Ocean Tech Solutions. My father. Marine technology, it made no sense. He had always mocked my interest in the ocean, calling it a childish fantasy. He claimed to know nothing about it. He had always told us his entire career was in medical device sales. I had never heard him mention this company or this man once. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the photograph, zooming in on the plaque. A quick search for Ocean Tech Solutions yielded nothing recent. It seemed the company no longer existed, but a more detailed search, digging through old business archives, finally gave me a hit. Ocean Tech Solutions was a small startup founded in 1986 by two partners, Robert Thorne and Dr. Arthur Vance. The name sounded vaguely familiar. I searched for Dr. Arthur Vance, and my blood ran cold. The search results were filled with articles about a brilliant but tragic figure in marine science. Dr. Vance had been a pioneer in developing sonar equipment for mapping the ocean floor. His work had been revolutionary. According to an old university tribute page, he had passed away suddenly in 1990 from a heart attack, leaving behind a wife and young daughter. The tribute mentioned he was on the cusp of a major breakthrough with his company, Ocean Tech, but after his untimely death, the company was dissolved and its patents were sold off. My father's partner was a marine scientist. The very field he ridiculed me for entering. Why had he hidden this? Why pretend his entire life's work was in a different field? A horrible suspicion began to form in my mind, a dark and ugly shape taking form in the shadows of my family's history. My father hadn't just been a salesman. He'd been a co-founder of a marine tech company with a brilliant scientist who died just before their work could take off, and then, conveniently, the patents were sold. I thought about the timeline. Dr. Vance died in 1990. I was born in 1993. The big house, the private schools, the sudden jump in our family's wealth. It all happened in the years immediately following the death of my father's secret partner. He hadn't just sold medical devices. He had sold Arthur Vance's legacy. The question was, did he sell it legally, and for how much? The man who called me a loser for pursuing my passion had built his kingdom on the work of a man just like me. The irony was sickening. I closed the photo album, my hands trembling. This wasn't just about an insult at a party anymore. This was about a secret my father had buried for over 30 years, and I was going to be the one to dig it up. The next few weeks became a quiet obsession. My work at the lab gave me the perfect cover. I had access to university databases, archives, and legal research tools that the average person wouldn't. I spent my days analyzing coral bleaching data and my nights diving into the ghost of Ocean Tech Solutions. My first call was to my Uncle David. I trusted him implicitly, and I knew he had a better memory of the old days than I did. I met him at his workshop, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and varnish. I showed him the photograph. He squinted at it, his brow furrowed in concentration. Arthur Vance, he said, tapping the other man in the photo. Yeah, I remember him. A good man, brilliant, your dad's business partner back before he made it big in sales. Dad always said he was only ever in medical sales. I said carefully. He never mentioned Ocean Tech or Arthur. David sighed, setting down the photo on a workbench. Your father, he likes to control the narrative, Brooke. After Arthur died, he shut that whole chapter down, said it was a failed venture and a painful memory. We were all told not to bring it up. What happened to the company? I asked. Robert said he had to dissolve it. David explained that without Arthur, the technology was useless. He claimed he sold off the assets for a loss just to break even. A few years later, he got that big promotion in medical sales, and that's when the money really started coming in. At least, that's the story he told. The story he told? That phrase echoed what I was already thinking. It was a story, and I was starting to see the plot holes. I dug deeper. Using my university's access, I found the original incorporation documents for Ocean Tech Solutions. It was a 50/50 partnership between Robert Thorne and Arthur Vance. I also found the dissolution papers, filed 3 months after Arthur's death. The documents were signed by my father as the sole remaining partner. Everything seemed clean on the surface. The real breakthrough came when I started searching for the patents. Dr. Vance's work was in advanced underwater acoustic imaging. It was highly specialized. I referenced patent numbers from his academic papers with commercial patent sales in the early 1990s. And there it was, 1 year after Dr. Vance's death, the core patents belonging to Ocean Tech were not just sold off for a small sum. They were acquired by a massive global corporation specializing in offshore oil and gas exploration. The technology, designed to map delicate marine ecosystems, had been repurposed to find and extract fossil fuels. It was the ultimate perversion of Dr. Vance's work, but the most damning piece of information wasn't the sale itself, it was the price. The public records only showed the transfer, not the amount. It took me another week of relentless digging, combing through old financial news archives, until I found a small blurb in an industry journal from 1991. It mentioned the corporation's acquisition of a portfolio of promising sonar patents from a defunct startup. The article estimated the value of the deal to be in the tens of millions of dollars. Tens of millions. My father hadn't sold the assets at a loss. He had sold his deceased partner's life's work for a fortune, and then lied about it to everyone, including his own family. He had built our entire life, his entire legacy of success, on that money, the money that should have, at the very least, been split with Arthur Vance's widow and child. I searched for them next. I found a recent address for Dr. Vance's daughter, a woman named Dr. Lena Vance, the doctor. Before her name was another punch to the gut. She was a professor of astrophysics at a state university. She was brilliant, just like her father. I found a recent interview with her where she spoke about her father's legacy and how she wished she knew more about his work, but that everything was lost when his business partner dissolved the company after his death. She spoke of her mother having to work 2 jobs to put her through school. They had struggled while my father used their money to build his empire, funding my brother's law degree and my sister's startup condo, all while calling me a loser for pursuing a career in science, the very field he had plundered for his own gain. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. He hadn't just lied. He had stolen a man's legacy and condemned his family to a life of hardship, all so he could play the role of the successful patriarch. The rage that had been simmering inside me now boiled over into a white, hot fury. This wasn't about revenge for a petty insult anymore. This was about justice. Justice for Arthur and Lena Vance, and I knew exactly how I was going to deliver it. My plan began to take shape, piece by interlocking piece. A direct confrontation would be useless. My father was a master of denial and manipulation. He would twist the story, paint me as a bitter, jealous daughter, and my siblings would back him up without a second thought. I needed to expose him in a way he couldn't escape, in a public forum where his precious reputation would be shattered beyond repair. The key was Lena Vance. I reached out to her, not as the daughter of her father's former partner, but as a fellow scientist. I sent her a professional email, introducing myself as a marine biologist working on coral reef preservation. I told her I had come across her father's early papers on acoustic imaging and was struck by how forward, thinking they were. I asked if she might be willing to speak with me about his work, under the guise of wanting to honor his legacy in my own research. She responded within a day, her email filled with a poignant mix of pride and sadness. She was thrilled that someone was still recognizing her father's contributions. We scheduled a video call for the following week. During that call, I listened as she spoke about the man she barely got to know. She told me her mother had always suspected something was amiss with the company's dissolution, but, consumed by grief and with no resources, she had been unable to fight it. They received a check for a few $1,000s from my father, who told her it was all that was left after settling the company's debts. After listening to her story, I took a deep breath and laid my cards on the table. I told her who my father was and what I had discovered. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Lena finally spoke, her voice was shaking with a 30-year-old anger. I had not only confirmed her mother's suspicions, but had given her the proof they never had. She was in. My plan had 2 parts. The first was financial, the second was public. I knew my father's greatest weakness was his obsession with money and status, so that's where I would hit him. Coincidentally, a major philanthropic organization, the Hawthorne Foundation, had just announced a new multi-million-dollar legacy grant. It was called the Vanguard Grant for Oceanic Innovation, designed to fund a groundbreaking project that would have a lasting global impact on marine conservation. It was one of the most prestigious and financially significant grants in my field. With Lena's permission and using the evidence I'd gathered, we began preparing two things simultaneously. First, Lena's lawyers started drafting a lawsuit against my father for fraudulent enrichment, concealment, and breach of fiduciary duty. They would be demanding the original 50% of the patent sale, adjusted for 3 decades of inflation and interest, a sum that would be astronomical. Second, I started writing my proposal for the Vanguard grant, but it wasn't just any proposal. I framed the entire project around the direct legacy of Dr. Arthur Vance. My project proposed to use a modernized, open-source version of his acoustic imaging technology to create a global, publicly accessible map of at-risk coral reefs. It was ambitious, innovative, and directly tied to the very work my father had stolen and buried. The masterstroke was the name. I called it the Dr. Arthur Vance Memorial Project. The proposal was a work of art. I poured all my expertise and passion into it, weaving a narrative of a brilliant scientist whose work was cut short, and how this project would finally see his vision through to its intended purpose, not to exploit the oceans, but to save them. I submitted it knowing it was a long shot, but it was a crucial part of the trap. I continued to attend family dinners, playing the part of the dutiful, if disappointing, daughter. I was quiet, observant, and smiled my brittle smile. My father, oblivious, continued to mock my hobby, still waiting for those fish to start paying you a real salary, Brooke. He'd ask with a chuckle. I would just nod and say, "Any day now, Dad." He had no idea that a tidal wave was coming, one that I had set in motion. The grant announcement was in 2 months, strategically timed to be just before the next annual family reunion. It was going to be the stage for my father's final and most devastating performance. The day of the next family reunion arrived like a judgment day. The past year had been a tightrope walk of feigned normalcy. I had spoken to my father and siblings on birthdays and holidays, my voice even, my words polite. They saw my quietness as submission, a sign that I had finally accepted my place in the family hierarchy. They had no idea I wasn't quiet. I was waiting. 2 weeks before the reunion, I received the email. My proposal for the Vanguard grant had been accepted. I was now the director of the Dr. Arthur Vance Memorial Project, backed by a multi-million-dollar grant that would make headlines in the scientific community. The first domino had fallen. That same day, Lena Vance's lawyers served my father. A stoic legal courier arrived at his manicured doorstep and handed him the papers detailing the lawsuit. I heard from my mother that he had exploded in a rage, calling it a baseless shakedown. He immediately called Michael, his star lawyer son, to crush this. Now, standing on my parents' perfect lawn, the atmosphere was thick with tension. My father was putting on a brave face, but I could see the strain around his eyes. Michael and Jessica flanked him like bodyguards, casting suspicious glares in my direction. They clearly thought I was somehow involved, but they couldn't fathom how. Just as he had done every year, my father tapped his glass to begin his annual toast. The arrogance was still there, but this time it was brittle, defensive. "It's been an interesting year," he began, his eyes flicking towards me. "A year where some people try to dig up the past to cause trouble. But this family is strong. We don't break." He then launched into his usual praise of Michael's legal prowess and Jessica's sales records, his words more forceful than ever, as if trying to convince himself. He deliberately skipped over me. The omission was a statement. He was shunning me publicly. When he finished, a smattering of polite, uncertain applause followed. This was my cue. "Dad, you forgot someone," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the awkward silence. All heads turned to me. Before he could respond, I stepped forward. "Actually, I have an announcement of my own to make. A sort of project update, you could say." I saw Michael whisper something to my father, urging him to shut me down, but it was too late. I had the attention of the entire audience. As some of you know, my work is in marine biology. I started, my eyes scanning the crowd before landing on my father. It's a field I'm deeply passionate about, inspired by the unsung pioneers who came before. Pioneers like Dr. Arthur Vance. A flicker of panic crossed my father's face. Dr. Vance was a brilliant scientist who developed revolutionary sonar technology. I continued, my voice gaining strength. He co-founded a small company to bring his vision to life. Unfortunately, he passed away before he could see it through. His company was called Ocean Tech Solutions. A collective gasp went through the few older family members, like my Uncle David, who remembered the name. His business partner, the man who was left in charge of his legacy, told Dr. Vance's grieving family that the company was worthless. He gave them a pittance and sold off the patents, claiming it was a total loss. I paused, letting the words sink in. My father's face was turning a shade of pale gray, but it wasn't a loss, I said, my voice ringing with conviction. That partner sold the patents to an oil company for tens of millions of dollars. He stole that money. He stole another man's life's work, a legacy that should have been used to protect our oceans, and used it to fund his own life, to build this very house, and to launch the careers of children he deemed successful. I looked directly at my father, that partner. Was you Dad? The silence was absolute. Everyone was staring at Robert, whose face had crumpled into a mask of disbelief and fury. That's a lie, he sputtered. She's a vindictive, jealous liar. Is it? I countered, pulling a folder from my bag, because here is a copy of the patent sale agreement I found in industry archives, and here. I held up another paper, is the official announcement that I have just been awarded the Hawthorne Foundation's Vanguard grant to create the Dr. Arthur Vance Memorial Project, a multi-million-dollar global initiative to finish the work you stole from him. I turned to my siblings. Michael, I assume you've seen the lawsuit from Lena Vance, Arthur's daughter. You can't crush the truth. And Jess, all those influencer trips you take to beautiful beaches, they are being destroyed by the very oil companies Dad's stolen technology helped. They stared at me, speechless. For the first time, their perfect worlds had been shattered. The foundation of their success was a lie, and the proof was undeniable. The loser daughter had just exposed the family's patriarch as a fraud, in front of everyone he sought to impress. He was no longer the CEO, he was just a thief. The aftermath was not a fiery explosion, but a slow, complete collapse. The reunion ended in a flurry of hushed, horrified departures. No one met my father's eyes. His power, built on a currency of perceived success and moral authority, had evaporated in an instant. My siblings reacted in predictable ways. Jessica, horrified by the public relations nightmare, tried to distance herself immediately. She called me a few days later, not to apologize, but to accuse me of ruining the family name, a name that was now tied to a major grant and a prestigious memorial project, ironically. Michael, the lawyer, tried to bluster his way through, threatening me with a countersuit for slander. But he was a corporate lawyer, not a litigator, and he knew the evidence was stacked against them. His threats were hollow, the last gasps of a man whose entire career had been underwritten by a crime. My father, Robert, retreated into a fortress of bitter silence. Faced with an unwinnable lawsuit and social ruin, he became a ghost in his own oversized house. The man who craved an audience now hid from the world. He was forced to settle with Lena Vance. The amount was sealed, but it was enough to cost him his home, his savings, and the last vestiges of his pride. He lost everything he valued because he never valued the right things. My relationship with my immediate family was severed. There was no grand reconciliation, no tearful apology. Their betrayal ran too deep, and my revelation had exposed a truth they couldn't face. Sometimes the only way to heal is to amputate. But in the place of that broken family, a new one began to grow. My Uncle David was my rock, proud and unwavering in his support, and then there was Lena. We were two strangers, bound by the parallel injustices of our fathers. We became close friends, partners in righting a historical wrong. We worked together on the project, and through it, I felt a connection to the brilliant man whose legacy I was now honored to champion. We honored him by using his technology for its intended purpose, to understand and protect the marine world he loved. The Dr. Arthur Vance Memorial Project was a massive success. It brought me a different kind of wealth, not the kind my father understood, but a wealth of purpose. I traveled the world, led a team of passionate scientists, and made a tangible difference. My work was featured in documentaries and academic journals. I was no longer the loser daughter. I was a leader in my field. One evening, about a year later, I was standing on the deck of a research vessel in the Coral Sea, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I saw you on the news. Your mother and I watched. She said she was proud. It was from my father. There was no apology, no admission of guilt, but it was an acknowledgement, a concession from a broken man. I didn't reply. I put the phone away and looked out at the vast, endless ocean. The tide was coming in, washing away the old and bringing in the new. My father had tried to define my worth his whole life, using a warped measuring stick of money and status. But I had found my own way to measure a life, not in dollars earned, but in the legacy you build and the truths you're willing to fight for. And out here, surrounded by the quiet, powerful beauty of the natural world, I felt richer than he could ever imagine.